One of the highlights of this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival in July is a film called The Invisible Extinction. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the co-directors of the film, Steven Lawrence and Sarah Schenck. Welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be here.
Now, this is such a fascinating documentary. I learned so much about it, especially about microbes and the impact on the body, etc. What are the origins of this documentary? How did it all come about?
I became fascinated by the human microbiome when my younger child had a unexpected allergic reaction. She almost died when she was 2 years old, even though she'd been eating all sorts of foods, including nuts, but she then had a cookie and she started to have her airways shut down. She got very red, and we got her to the emergency room in the nick of time. And it was very unsatisfying to hear the emergency room doctors say, we have no idea why people get allergies. It's still a medical mystery. And so I started sleuthing around, and that was about 12 years ago now. And then I'm a filmmaker, so I started making a film, figuring other families and other people would be interested in some of the exciting research that was emerging.
How interesting. And the research is quite incredible because, as I say, I learned so much about microbiomes and so on. Tell me about gathering the information and the various people, Gloria and other people, in this documentary. It's so interesting.
Well, in as part of trying to get the film off the ground, I found Marty he was written about in an article in the New Yorker magazine, and it was one of the first kind of big pieces of coverage of the Human Microbiome Project in the popular press here in the United States. And I met, I'm in New York City, and he was very accessible. I met with him, and he was that very rare combination of highly regarded research scientist, but also really a rare communicator. And what was especially remarkable was that his wife, the microbiologist and microbial ecologist Gloria Dominguez Bello, was also this great communicator. But Steve will have lots to add also on that front.
Sure.
Well, I got involved at a stage when Sarah had done some preliminary filming and was looking for a collaborator. And my own journey to the film also has a health background. What happened to me is that I was one of these unfortunate people who got many rounds of antibiotics, in this case for a parasitic infection, that were medically unnecessary. And I kept getting bombed with round after round, and developed just terrible health problems, autoimmune problems, allergies, irritable bowel syndrome, food intolerances, the list goes on and on. But that was back in the 1990s and early 2000s when no one was thinking about the microbiome and thinking about the consequences of nuking humans with antibiotics. So I was very motivated to work on a documentary that would be kind of a wake-up call of perhaps like The Inconvenient Truth about the climate crisis, that would raise awareness about the importance of the human microbiome and some of the medical practices and other practices that we've been engaged in for many years that have been damaging our microbes and our health.
How very interesting, because obviously this research is relatively new, and I'm so intrigued as to the way you found out so much great information and spoke to people who were suffering or children, etc. It's I was so interested in the way you put all this information together and found so much.
Well, it was quite a challenge. My background is more in verite, character-driven documentaries, and I wanted very much to bring the character-driven side of that to the film. And in Marty and Gloria, we have these wonderful, relatable characters who also happen to be scientists, and we have a love story as well. So those were fantastic ingredients. And then we wanted to tell the stories of a few patients who are struggling with illnesses connected to disruption of their gut microbes. And so there was a journey to find those patients and the researchers and scientists who are working with them. Well, Sarah can speak more about that.
Well, can I like to take a brief moment to give a round of applause, not just to Steve, who is a brilliant documentarian and brought so much to the film in terms of his 30 years of experience making character-driven, brilliant documentaries, but he also was critical to connecting us with some other people who are kind of the unsung heroes of the film. That is, they're not the scientists or the patients. They're not us, the co-directors and producers, but our editor, Russ Green, really, we had over 200 hours of footage for this film, and taking that gigantic, all those stories and all those people, many of whom, are not included in the film at all, and winnowing it down into something that was accessible and engaging to people. A lot of that is Russ Green, who's a fabulous editor. And also a lot of it is due to our London-based graphics and animation team, Bluespill, and the team that Ant brought together to help us share the story that has, there's a fair amount of detail to what we wanted to share with people, and it can be overwhelming. And so having those beautiful and interesting visualizations of some of the information I think has also been one of the really successful parts of the film that, Steve and I were very fortunate to work with these talented folks. If you
we shouldn't forget our composer, Han Rowe, because music is so critical to films, and often composers go unrecognized. But there's a beautiful score to this film that resonates not only with the characters, but with the microbial universe that we created through animation. And Sarah is right to point out how important that work was.
Absolutely. Yes, I was going to say the music is great, and the animations and the visuals just add so much. You must have had some good production behind you, because there's travels to Venezuela, Israel, and various other places. So, I mean, you really crossed the globe to get the story out.
Well, can we tell you a secret, Peter? We did cross the globe, and we did get to we shot in Switzerland and Israel, and we had a very talented team whom we directed remotely in China, but we did not go to China for a variety of reasons. That's a kind of complicated story that we can maybe talk about with you off camera. And in Venezuela, the magnificent footage is courtesy of one of Gloria's, he's a medical doctor, a parachutist, and his name is Oscar, and he shot that footage while he was, conducting research and also providing medical care to the indigenous peoples. So that was footage that we worked with, but we didn't actually shoot in Venezuela ourselves.
And the story behind that is pretty simple, and I think will be recognized by many documentary filmmakers, which is usually we didn't have the money.
Yeah.
It was very expensive to go into the remote Amazon. It would have cost, $35,000 to $50,000 US for just one of us to go. And this documentary was made over many years, raising money in bits and pieces as we went by, from fantastic donors who became executive producers and investors, and then finally a completion grant from the Sundance Documentary Fund. But we just had to find a way to keep going and to follow the story, and that meant following Marty and Gloria, and they were going to China. So we had to find the best possible surrogates in China, in 3 different cities. And, we were very fortunate in having Oscar Noya Alarcón as our DP, MD DP, probably one of the few in history to be both in Venezuela.
Uh-huh. What an interesting process, and the power of filmmaking. As I said, I learned a lot, and I must say I was blanching slightly when we got to the topic of fecal transplants and, and so on, which I think the audience will find both interesting and repellent at the same time. But but it is such an important aspect of the research that you've done.
Well, you have one of the world's leading practitioners of fecal transplants in Australia, Dr. Thomas Borody, who is a friend and colleague of Marty's and Gloria's. And we're very grateful to him for actually, I think he's going to be sharing the word about our screening with some of his Australia-based collaborators and researchers. But you have a lot of really exciting research happening in fecal transplants and in the microbiome in Australia. You're really at the cutting edge of the field.
Well, the fecal transplants, or FMT as it's called in short, open the door for a lot of microbiome research that's happening now, because it turned out to be almost a miracle cure. Well, not almost, in fact, a miracle cure for a specific, very problematic disease called Clostridium difficile, C. diff infection. And one of the characters in our film went through it and was cured by a fecal transplant. And so, that really stimulated a lot of research, a lot of questioning. If hitting a person with microbes from a healthy donor would reverse an illness that's as difficult and challenging, antibiotic resistant in many cases, as C. diff, what is in those microbes? What is possible in treating disease through those microbes? And our film is a snapshot of the early stages of this scientific revolution in microbiome research.
And that's what I found so interesting, that obviously a lot of research still has to go into all of this, and the medical community across the world really has to stand up and work on this, and the whole issue too of food allergies and so on, that young children have more food allergies, as we see. So, there's so much going on in this area that you've participated in terms of your documentary, which I found so fascinating.
Thank you.
And
Well,
our gut microbiome is being explored in relation to many other diseases. One which we look at in this film is autism. And no one is claiming at this point that microbial treatment or fecal transplant is going to cure autism. But there's a very interesting story in our film about a Chinese boy who undergoes a series of fecal transplants, who is seriously autistic. And I'm not going to give away spoilers. Viewers should see the film to discover what happens to him in the process.
Absolutely, and I suppose the next step about this film and the power of filmmaking is to galvanize more research and the medical community to really look into this in much more detail.
That's absolutely our goal, Peter. We have a couple other big goals in making the film. One of them is to preserve the use of our precious antibiotics for human health, but also to be better stewards of our antibiotics. And I'm not sure what's happening in Australia now, but in the United States, there's a growing movement of professionals and the nurses, doctors, to only prescribe antibiotics when they're truly needed, which half the time in the United States that antibiotics are prescribed to people, they are medically unnecessary. That means they're being prescribed to people who don't have an illness that will respond to the antibiotics. So there's collateral damage to their good bugs happening with no potential benefit to them. a lot of times people's diseases will resolve on their own. So sometimes people think, oh, I took antibiotics and now I got better. Sometimes we do need antibiotics with strep throat. Antibiotics is the standard of care for strep throat. But so our big hope is to reduce those 50% of antibiotic prescriptions that are being used for non-bacterial diseases that won't respond to antibiotics. It's also we would like the United States to follow the lead of the European Union and get antibiotics out of our food supply. We are using our antibiotics to make our meat cheaper. And we do not have a problem with protein accessibility right now in the United States. We do have a problem with food insecurity, but the way of dealing with that is not by pumping our precious antibiotics into our livestock.
And that I found was another critical aspect of your documentary, because that I hadn't realized that that was happening, and it's incredible.
I didn't understand that until I sat down and I after talking with Marty, and he talked about how he had this aha moment when he was like, oh, we use antibiotics. We don't treat, it's not that we're treating animals that are sick and then that's when they get antibiotics. It's that years and years ago, like in the 1950s and 60s, farmers noticed that if you put a little bit, it's called low dose antibiotics, a little bit of antibiotics in animals' feed all the time. So they're always getting this little bit of antibiotics. They get fat faster. So if you're a producer who's raising your cows with regular feed and I'm using antibiotics in mine, I'm going to put you out of business because I'm going to bring my animals to market faster. And Marty's saying, oh, I looked and I thought, if that's what we're doing, antibiotics are doing to animals, what are we doing to our kids? Is that why we're having an epidemic of childhood obesity and adult obesity in our country? And I thought that he put that very powerfully in our film. That why would we human animals behave differently than other animals in terms of antibiotic exposure?
Yep. Absolutely. It's incredible stuff. So I'm interested in the reactions that your film is having, because I know it's screened at various film festivals, and in particular, I'm interested in the medical community in general. How has it responded?
It's been very positive across the board. The general public has responded with great enthusiasm at festivals, and after the U.S. release, we did a limited theatrical release, and then it became available through streaming platforms. And the medical community and the scientific research community is thrilled about the film, because this is an unusual example of a scientific documentary or a science documentary that really tells the story of the work they're doing in personal terms, in relatable terms. And so we find doctors and scientists saying, well, yes, I may know a lot of what's in this film, but it's just fantastic to see it presented in a way that a general audience can get it and get galvanized to think about this and ask questions, and also support the research that the scientific community is doing. And as Sarah pointed out, there's also the need for legislation for countries to make sure that we have antibiotics and other new treatments that can work for diseases that are coming along. And that includes viruses. I mean, we touch on the impact of COVID-19 in the film. We look at that, and Marty speaks very eloquently about our microbiome as one of our first lines of defense, not just against bacterial infections, but against viruses. So this is a win-win, let's say, for the general audience and for the scientific community.
Just to be clear, our film is for people who don't know what a microbe is. We didn't, just full disclosure, I didn't know exactly. I thought a microbe is a little small thing, in our bodies, but I didn't know, is it a germ? Is it one kind? I didn't know what a microbe was. I didn't understand the definition of microbes, and I certainly had no idea of the totally critical role they play in our health and well-being. And we have audience responses. People say, thank you for helping me understand why my body is working the way it is, why my acne suddenly cleared up when I stopped using these products, why, I started gaining weight after I had a bunch of courses of antibiotics. So it's the enthusiasm of regular people like ourselves to understand better how our bodies work that's really our core audience. And we're very grateful to scientists whom we've heard say, thank you for helping us find the terminology and the ways of sharing ideas with our communities and our patients in terms that are accessible and can be understood, that aren't sciencey, complicated terms.
And it's also, just very quickly, the film is helping Gloria and Marty with Gloria's brilliant initiative to create a microbiome vault, a kind of Noah's Ark of our ancestral microbiome that will be available for research and may help us cure diseases in the future. And that's a very important mission. We wholeheartedly support that, and we want viewers of our film to learn more about it and support the vault as well.
Absolutely. The educational function of this film, especially as it could be used in schools and various other outlets, would be tremendous in terms of educating so many people about this, which, as I said, I learned so much about.
Thank you. We're so happy to hear you say that.
So, yes.
May I say one other thing about the microbiota vault?
Yes.
So, well, Gloria spearheaded the creation of a microbiota vault, and she and teams of researchers around the world have been gathering samples, poop samples, but also skin and oral samples from all over people's bodies and in the environment. But the owners of those samples are the countries themselves. So just to be clear on, so if you are, the Venezuelan samples are owned by the people who are providing those samples. So it's not Gloria or even a different entity that is owning these samples. And that is something that's come up. So I think they've learned a lot of lessons from the seed vault in terms of protecting this. It's a global inheritance. We want to protect it for all people in all places, but the actual ownership and control of it will be held by the people providing those samples.
Mm-hmm. Another way of saying this is that it is a collaboration. It is not appropriation in any sense. And people who are sensitive to that are right to be concerned and to ask those questions.
Okay, no, that's fair comment. I didn't feel the appropriation aspect. I felt more collaboration and for the benefit of mankind, that sort of thing. So that's so important. So well done on that. So look, congratulations on the film, Sarah and Steven, and the film, of course, will be screening at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, and I'm sure audiences will be fascinated. Are you both working on another film or a follow-up at the moment?
Sarah?
We are. A great amount of our time is still put into sharing the word about the human microbiome and getting the invisible extinction out into the world. But I have just recently dipped my toe into two new, making this film bizarrely, even though it was over a decade, I became even more interested in health and science conversations and storytelling. And I'm working on a film on menopause, different cultural understandings of menopause and treatments of menopause. And on the other side of things, I'm also working on teen mental health and mental health access to treatment, that are two subjects that are very dear to my heart. Different films, I should say.
Yes, but understandable because they're both important topics. And Steven, what about you? Are you also working on anything else?
Well, too many things, too many balls in the air at the same time. I have a couple of personal projects that I'm trying to get done that are family stories. I have a fantastic longitudinal documentary that I was working on over many years with the late Michael Apted about marriage that I am trying to figure out how to finish.
Brilliant work.
A couple of other projects, one about the legacy of Rabbi Meir Kahane and the whole problem that we have between Israel and Palestine, the kind of baked-in hatred and bigotry, and it's a multi-generational saga of that problem and healing from it. So I have many things that I'm working on at once, and again, this will be familiar to documentary filmmakers. We have to have so many projects in development at the same time because it's very hard to get just one of them properly financed.
And yet the topics that you're both talking about are so important and interesting, and the power of documentary filmmaking, which is just so superb, and bring them on, because we need to learn more and see more about issues. So look, we've been speaking to Sarah Schenck and Steven Lawrence, the co-directors of the Invisible Extinction, screening in July as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. Thank you both so much for talking with me.
Peter, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.